Hello and welcome to Movers and Shakers. I'm Ken Miller. Today I'm joined by District 5 Senator-elect Jeff Pittman. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Ken.
And we've had you on before. Of course, you were a House member then, and I guess technically you're still a House member until, what's the January date when
January 11th is when we actually get sworn in.
Okay.
Presuming everything goes as normal.
Okay. I just want to mention that we are socially distanced here, 6 feet. I think for audio reasons, we're both going to take off our masks, and you'll be able to hear us better. So let's get started. Of course, the 2021 Kansas legislative session is going to get going in January. We're recording this before Christmas in December. Talk about some of the bigger issues that are being faced this year. I guess we'll start with COVID-19, but I know you've also been involved with the Department of Labor.
I will. So let me start with, just for those who don't know me, I'm Jeff Pittman. I've been a state representative for two terms in Leavenworth, and now I've been elected, thankfully, thanks to all those in District 5 who helped elect me. And know that I'm going to represent those, all the people, all my constituents here in District 5. I thank my family and all the supporters out there. But more importantly, you know, I'm from Leavenworth. I graduated here from Leavenworth High, and I've got a great family. I'm married to Miss Holly Shehorn. Thankful for all her support, and I've got 3 kids. One in university, one who's going to Lansing High, and one who's over in Anthony Elementary. And so I recognize that the strains the current pandemic has put on our working families out here. And I think that's really leads us into that first question.
Sure.
The first question of, you know, what's going on with the COVID pandemic? Now, I want to let you know I'm here for you. I've responded to a lot of different people who've gone through unemployment issues with the state and had different kind of issues going on. And so I want to make sure if you need to get a hold of me, you can always get a hold of me at jeff@votepitman.com. And then I'll have a Senate email address coming up soon as well. And that's really, you know, when we think about what's coming up with the legislative session, it's about, you know, the safety of our citizens, and it's about economic recovery.
Sure.
We've got, you know, we've got the pandemic relief fund from the federal government that we've spent. It was about $1 billion, $1.034 billion in COVID relief funds, and 55 million of that went to small businesses. And we know the strains it's obviously had on the small businesses around here. You know, those grants help restaurants, our bars, movie theaters. They've even helped our St. Mary's and KCC colleges with some of those grants. And it's really helping keep our businesses open. And we're going to have to continue to look at how we keep access to capital flowing to these businesses as we get through this. I'm optimistic about our vaccine. You know, you might be watching this a little bit in the future. You can tell my future self if I was right or not. But I'm hoping that we can get through this in the next months and really start our economic development, our economic recovery. But it's important this Christmas season, presuming this comes out before Christmas,
Yes.
That we continue to shop local, support our local economy.
Oh, even after Christmas too.
Well, there you go.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
That's a good practice. I want to thank all the Main Street organization for keeping that access and the grants going, the local banks for getting our PPP loans out to those businesses. We're going to have to continue. You know, we don't know if there's going to be relief funds from the federal government that's going to be reinitiated. But presuming they are, part of the initial parts of the session will be to look at those fundings and see how successful have the programs that we put in place been, and then how successful, what kinds of things should we be investing in, whether it's more responses, access to internet infrastructure. We've spent something like $5 million, I think, on internet access and making sure kids have access to internet during this pandemic. There's also been about I'm just kind of going through what we've done so far, 18 million in terms of public health, boosting up our local health departments and providing aid to the safety net clinics like St. Vincent's. And we've actually, just so you know, there's a new testing site for free testing here in
St. Mary's.
At St. Mary's. It's 7 days a week, 8:30 to 4:30 at St. Mary's, and that's been helped out by the funds. And so we've got to we're going to have a continued focus on this at the legislative level. There's some fundamental questions that we're going to continue to address. We have to address the Emergency Powers Act of the governor and how her responses are either curtailed by the current act. We have to come up with within January, basically, what are we as a legislature willing to endorse or imbue the governor with in terms of emergency powers that would be any different than what we had during the previous year.
And we're recording this on December 17th,
Yep.
and I know I got a news release from the governor's office today.
That's right.
And it's about the vaccine.
Oh, about the vaccine. I was thinking
rollout.
about the supersonic air transport corridor.
No,
That's going
yeah.
around. But that's around transportation.
And we've got transportation questions too. But as far as the vaccine rollout goes, you mentioned how COVID's obviously going to take up a lot of the air in the legislature,
It will.
especially for the first couple of
month,
months.
too. Yeah.
Right. But from a vaccine standpoint, you being senator-elect, what are you hearing? I mean, the basics seem to be healthcare workers first,
Absolutely.
people that serve the elderly population.
And then the elderly population
Right.
themselves.
Are you hearing anything further than that?
Teachers?
Teachers, okay.
Yep, I've been up.
So they'd be like maybe a tier 2 when they'd be getting the
They'd be
vaccine?
upped, they've recently been upped in terms of their priority when it comes to
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But, there's a constrained supply coming, and they're distributing to all those different states, and we're getting our supplies. It's really a phenomenal effort. My background is in supply chain, which is the matter of predicting out how much you need, coming up with the inventory you need, and then producing it and distributing it across
Right.
a network.
Right.
And this is a supply chain, this is a big beast that they've tackled in terms of getting the product out and delivering it. I haven't been vaccinated.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to be on the list for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And I do hope that it is effective, and I encourage folks to go out and get it. And if you're in the eligible population, I encourage all to go out and get it when they can to help with that.
Right. I don't want to get too much further into COVID-19 because I think we could leave this room and in an hour, a lot of the stuff could change, and that's the only reason why. I think this is
absolutely
a
right.
growing beast, and a week from now, you're going to be dealing with probably questions that maybe
Well, the big
you didn't
things-
anticipate right now.
From a legislative point, we're also figuring out how are we going to work. Just like all the different businesses have readjusted, the ones that have been able to work through the pandemic and the education cycle, we have to, as a legislature, figure out how are we going to have committee meetings? Are we going to have
Right.
those? We've invested in what's called the virtual warehouse with part of the Spark funding, and that's exciting. It's about transparency into the committee process.
Sure.
It's also about remote conferencing, meaning when we have hearings and such, we now can, if we choose to, enable folks to Zoom in from or use WebEx or whatever platform from outside the building,
Right.
which is kind of unusual. We've never done that before.
Right.
And there's talks about whether we're actually going to be able to vote
Right.
remotely, but I think that's going to be, we're going to be a bit more conservative on that
Right.
because there are some constitutional
I
limitations.
think
that
the
we have to
Attorney
deal with.
General had a statement about that.
He had an
Final
opinion.
votes. Yeah, an opinion.
On final votes that needed
Right.
to be, if we wanted to keep it absolutely uncontested,
Right.
the safest decision would be to have that final vote in the Capitol itself.
Right. Right.
But it is, the COVID is impacting a lot of things we're going to be talking about. And when we think about this, I want to make sure folks realize that unemployment, big issue.
Right.
Supporting the Department of Labor. So many people have had issues with getting the assistance that they need. And a lot of that's due to the old technology. Technology is also my background, and that's what I work on. I'm on the Joint Technology Committee, as well as the Information Technology Executive Council. And what we're seeing is, we should have updated, the funding just was cut, and the system was almost 30, 40 years old. 30 to 40 years old. And that's just ancient
Right.
in technical terms. And so we've updated the system, and it is working better now. There was there's so many applications coming through, and I think that what they've said is they've serviced something like 3.4 million claims, totaling about $2.4 billion in unemployment, insurance, and federal funding that helps with assistance. That's huge, but
Right.
on top of that is this fraud.
Right. As
And-
somebody who is a victim of it,
Right.
and I think 3/4 of the employees in Lansing, city of Lansing, are victims of it too.
3/4, and,
Right.
and the teachers are getting hit.
Right.
And they're saying that there's not like a breach that's happened that they can detect on the dark web from my briefing yesterday. That would systematically say, hey, there was a breach in the Department of Labor or the Department of Education or anything like that. It's just there has been breach after breach in terms of Equifax and some of these other major corporations, and it's about cross-referencing. So what was the form of your attack?
Well, I was told by our finance director here at the city that somebody had filed unemployment insurance under my name with my social security number, And that's, thankfully, before the Department of Labor did anything, I guess it's modus operandi to check with the organization that you allegedly
It is now.
worked with.
Yes.
Most recently. In my case, as far as I know, I'm still working there. And when they checked that, they found that it was fraud, that I'm not unemployed, I do not qualify for benefits because I have a job. And since then, I'm now spending some money on the Equifax credit check and all that stuff too. But I don't, is that, from what you're hearing, is that kind of the normal story, or is that, or other variations?
So I was briefed that about 175,000 fraud claims have been shut down just in the past few weeks. 175,000. There's a business downtown that talked to me and said they've had 5 fraud claims just in the past day or two of people who didn't even work there. So what you need to do is make sure that you report it. If you find this happening and you get a mail, you get an email that looks legit, but especially if you get a piece of mail that says, hey, your claim has been denied or whatever, make sure you report that at www.fraudreport.ks.gov. And then also, I'd suggest going to www.identitytheft.gov. That's the US site. And that helps keep the federal picture. We're now coordinating, the Department of Labor is coordinating with many different states with analytics that are looking across different platforms, and it's rating the likelihood of reports to be fraud. But the tragedy here is, of course, those that need it and that are eligible
Absolutely.
are getting snagged up in that net. And so that's why I'd encourage you, if you find yourself snagged up in that net of being identified as a fraud and you feel like there's something legitimate there in terms of your claim, and you want further answers, do contact me. Contact me, or you can always log an email and go to the Department of Labor site. It just is sometimes easier to contact me and help me work you through that system.
Sure, okay. All right, let's move on. You and I have had conversations when you were in the House, and I believe you were on the House Transportation Committee.
Yep.
And actually, you and I have met with KDOT Secretary Julie Lorenz. But you're very familiar with transportation. Now, are you still waiting on committee assignments in the Senate? So that's going to happen
next few days.
Next few days, you'll know.
So yeah, I was on transportation for 4 years, and we helped pass the 10-year strategic plan last year. And next this coming budget, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm hoping to help support continued financing of that budget. We restored that over the last couple of years, and you've seen the impact here. You see that we've made a bigger emphasis on maintenance.
Right.
You see K7 out here has been resurfaced, and you'll see a lot of improvements, as well as the money that was recently brought in for the Eisenhower intersection and some other locations. And so I'm hoping, I've got that on my list of potential committees for the next 4 years to get on the transportation and potentially transportation spending aspect. Secretary Lorenz, she was busy. She was also on the Spark Committee, which administered.
I think she was running it, wasn't she?
Well, that's a testament to her capabilities. I think she's brought a very analytic and a measured approach to the office, which I appreciate. She has me on her advisory board. Maybe that's it. No, I'm kidding. But we've got on the plan for the next 10 years. We've got the Centennial Bridge up in Leavenworth is about an $80 million upgrade in terms of increasing capacity potentially. There's no plans about when that would happen, but it's on the list of consideration or plans that beyond consideration that are on the list for probably happening, but there is nothing done in terms of the engineering or the roads.
The 10-year program, as I recall from last year, is kind of broken up into 5 2-year programs. So the Centennial Bridge project, I don't think was in that additional 2-year.
That's correct.
But it is programmed for further out. That's correct. Okay.
And we reassess the plan, or they reassess the plan every 2 years to get a a more. As things change, let's flex with the priorities of the state.
Sure. Now, obviously, down here in Lansing, we're very interested in the Gateway project. I know you're aware of that.
I love the name, by the way. The Eastern Gateway is so much better than the second bridge.
I think everybody in Lansing would agree with that as well. Commissioner Culbertson, obviously one of the champions for that, one of the named champions for that with the Leavenworth County Commission. Talk a little bit, and again, it's still, I'd say, early stages as far as how the state might or might not be involved with that.
That's right.
But talk about your impressions of that project.
So I'm working with a couple of commissioners, working with executive staff on LCDs, the Leavenworth County Development Corporation.
The Port Authority, right?
And the secretary, and hoping to engage as well the Platte City and MoDOT representatives. And hopefully Mark, which is the Mid-America, or the Regional Council of Kansas City, that helps, coordinate regional plans, because this is a regional expansion kind of project. And my goal, I was approached by a number of parties, say, hey, can you help us out with this and bridge some gaps to make sure we're all communicating on the same thing. It's important for the Department of Transportation that we have a regional plan, an updated regional plan, meaning how does Leavenworth County plan? And and they would like to be a partner in investing in that and seeing how that potential bridge project fits into the overall regional plan, and that regional analysis also helps Mark understand how does that fit into their plan. It's a lot about planning and strategic planning, because a bridge like this is obviously not just a 2 to 5 year investment, but a 5 to 30 year.
Absolutely, yeah, it's long term for sure.
It's not about just decreasing or decreasing the traffic count elsewhere or increasing the traffic because of increase. It's also, in this particular instance, about potential economic development.
Sure.
So, as long as we're doing a regional analysis and fitting in with these other areas, regional plans, and positioning it, and then evaluating the potential, what's the potential traffic count and any financing methods and what those would need to be, I'm all about strategic planning and making sure, but it's important that we all go forward with our eyes wide open and understand that we can't just have a point solution without also looking at the other aspects if we expect to have outside investment.
Right, and this, transportation is obviously one facet of my next question. You are now going to be, as of January 11th, the 5th District State Senate person for the area. I live down in Piper, Lansing is included in that in your 5th District.
Correct.
Good part of Leavenworth is as well.
Yep.
When you look at your now new district that you will represent as a senator, state senator, what do you see in terms of growth? And I'm not just talking about economic development, but I'm talking about population growth. What are you looking at now that you're in it?
Yeah. So we see in Leavenworth City, it's got a constrained boundary. There are some areas that it would grow, but it almost has to grow within itself.
And the fort is obviously part of that.
Fort is it's the big, contributor why the people are there.
Right.
As well as the Centennial Bridge is an easy access point. We see down in Piper, there's amazing growth going down there. We see Baser, we see Bonner as extensions of the Kansas City population are starting to move into those areas. We're the northwest quadrant of Kansas City, and if you look to the northeast quadrant in Missouri, it's really built up over to Liberty and all these other areas.
Absolutely,
and,
152, yeah.
And so you look at that and you realize we haven't exactly expanded as quickly as that, but the growth is there. I cannot see how it's not going to happen unless we inhibit it somehow. And I think that most folks are looking to grow economically and grow smartly. We want to keep the characteristics and the communities we have here. But I do see that there's going to be increased growth over the next 10 years across from Lansing all the way down through the Baser area. And Piper is going to continue to grow to the north as it expands.
Right.
And those require us to have things like grocery stores that are going to service those places. Adequate throughput in terms of the transportation. So we're going to have to look at K7, we're going to have to look at how we connect into that 435 loop and see how we're going to facilitate that and make it something where we still want to live here. We want it to be smart growth where we keep the character and keep all the advantages and all the great things of our area without having it just overrun into stoplight after stoplight.
Right. All right, so a couple of issues that admittedly are less important but are very interesting to me, and we've talked about this next one before in your office and here, as a matter of fact. But as you well know, and I'm a guy from the East Coast, so it's a little bit bigger on the East Coast than it is in the Midwest right now, but numerous state legislatures have adopted rules regarding sports gambling in the past 2 or 3 years. Is this on the horizon for Kansas this session, at least getting a bill to where you guys are going to be able to debate it?
Sure. So last session, last 2 years, there were two bills. There was one in the Senate and there was one in the House. First off, I'm in full support. I think it's something that as we go through this COVID pandemic, the budget's going to be, we're going to have some real question marks.
So you see it as a revenue enhancement?
I see it as a revenue enhancement. Sure, that's fair. And that's one of the questions that, as there's a couple of different dimensions that have held it up. Well, hurdles, if you want, is how much does the state, in terms of percentages, get? If we're going to enable it, and we're going to look at it as a revenue enhancement, what does that mean? How much do we have? And one bill had it at something like 5%, and another had it at 15%. So there's a little bit of a philosophical debate there about when we enable this, should zero go to the government? Should some go? And if we're going to help it out and have it go through the lottery and everything else, how much should go through that? That's a point. That's a sticky point.
Right.
Another point that stuck is the governor has pushed hard to have iLottery, meaning sports betting enabled in an app inside the geo-fenced areas of Kansas. And there were some that didn't want that, and there are some that do. I think that's a sticking point where she would really like to see that.
Geo-fenced within Kansas itself, or along like the Missouri-Kansas border or the Nebraska? How would you geo-fence that?
So when you're using it on your phone, it kind of locates where you're at as you use the app.
Right.
And then it, within the boundaries, as far as I understand it, within the boundaries, I mean, I don't know if you can actually go across into Missouri like 100 yards or something.
Right.
I'm not sure how specific.
And I bring that up because having been in the New York, New Jersey area,
that's true.
It's legal in New Jersey, and I've heard stories about when people are in I can't remember if it's the Lincoln, one of the tunnels to go between New Jersey and New York, that the app...
Technically, they're gambling in New York?
Well, technically, the app no longer works anymore once they cross the border.
Right.
It's because of the geofence.
That's how it would work.
I guess what I'm asking about the geofencing is geofencing within segments of Kansas itself or all of Kansas itself?
All of Kansas.
Okay.
I'm sure that we could if counties wanted to opt out. I'm not sure if the legislation would require it for counties to do it. There's probably a possibility. There's always a possibility that a county could opt out if we included that. I haven't heard that as a concern yet, but that might be something that someone brings up.
We've seen counties opt out of a lot of things lately.
Yep.
Right. So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right, and I didn't want to spend too much time on that because that's more of a personal thing. Did you have something else you wanted
The
to
other
add on?
aspect that was holding up was there were some amendments that wanted to bring back dog racing, and that caused a lot of concern with a lot of legislators, legislators. Yeah, so that was another sticking point. I think there's a real possibility though that we are going to be able to move that into a real legislation in the next 2 years.
And from a revenue standpoint, and I know that's something that folks like yourself are going to be very interested in. Anybody that's elected to the House or Senate in the state is going to be interested in that. But as far as the revenue ramifications, because of where we find ourselves budgetarily, and I don't think it's as bad as we thought back in March, April.
That's right. The revenues have started coming in from, we had delayed the the tax deadline out by, I think it was it 3 months? Yep.
Right.
And that had put us past our budget estimating time, so we had a much lower estimate, and now we've bounced back up. But it's still a challenge for us.
And where I'm going with this is I don't feel like there's as much pressure perhaps as we thought maybe 6 months ago for you to come up with additional sports gambling or whatnot, revenue sources.
Medical marijuana as another
medical
one.
Bridging the gap, because I don't think the gap is as large as
There's
what
still
we thought.
potentially a gap though, and we have to be very conscious that, I was going to talk about this later, but as we look at this next session, the budget is going to be a big topic. It always is.
Right.
I mean, it's about where do we invest our money inside of our state resources? Is it education? Is it transportation? Is it more economic recovery capital for our small businesses, or is it about emergency response and helping shut down this vaccine early, and then transitioning that into something else? So but we are going to be constrained, I think.
Sure. In more normal times, the next issue would probably be taking up a lot of the air in the room, and now it's kind of second or third tier. But what about Medicaid expansion? I mean, we have talked about that for years running now. What happens to it this session?
Well, I'm a supporter, as I have been. It probably won't happen, though. I mean, because of who was elected in 2020, November, in terms of the legislature, I think it will continue to be blocked. Which, you know, in my perspective, we have given up billions of federal funding over the last 5 years that could have gone into our healthcare system and really helped us with this COVID response. But I do think it's going to not necessarily be an option over the next 2 years. There's always a possibility, you know, but it feels as though this is probably not going to happen.
Off the top of your head, do you recall how many states are still not participating?
Oh my gosh, I wish I would have looked at that.
So
I should have looked at that beforehand. I think it's about 37 that are participating in some form with expanded Medicaid, that, where the federal government pays for 90% and the state kicks in 10% and raises the poverty level up. So that would leave about 12, 13 states that are not participating in that right now.
Okay, all right. Well, I wanted to wrap up. I know, you know, you're already starting to work for the 2021 session, formally, informally. Are there any issues that we haven't covered so far today, and we've covered some of the main ones, but maybe some issues that are flying under the radar right now that you say, hey, we're going to see this in a month or two in the legislature and it's going to be a big deal?
Well, I will say this, that I'm looking forward to working with, you know, my Republican counterparts, my Democrat counterparts, and moving the state forward safely, you know, and look towards solutions on the economic development path. I think those are going to be some big things. I can talk about the things that I'm personally focused on. I introduced this VA home possibility, getting on the list with the federal government last session. Worked on it a couple of years in terms of figuring out what were the ins and outs, and then realized it's an incredibly simple solution to get on there. It's about allocating and having a plan in Northeast Kansas where the population of veterans are. And I'm encouraged that we've set the groundwork, that I'm working with, you know, I'd like to work with those in the House that want to progress that, and the governor. I think there's a possibility we could do that this year or next, and so I'm excited about that. I'm excited, we had, oddly enough, a funeral procession bill. And, you know, we have 2 national, you know, cemeteries here. And so for us, we've got a lot of riders out there and escorts that do this every day almost. You know, it's quite I can't tell you how thankful I am they do this. We in Kansas don't have a definition of what a funeral procession. We don't even recognize it, and you have people stopping, you know, for traffic and going through red lights and all this. They could technically get hit, and the insurance company could technically say, "Hey, look, you know, you're not eligible for benefits." And so it's a matter of enforcing some of those. I've had a lot of support on that, but it's really, I think, looking at that. We've had an emphasis on technology, you know, when it comes to fraud. That's been big in terms of the unemployment system. My background, like I said, is technology, and we're continuing to see that we need to rethink and architect across agencies and across different government entities and say, hey, look, how can we leverage what we're doing everywhere and come up with common standards and push forward in a way that helps us be more resilient to things like what's happening now. I think we're going to have to look at these schools and see how we've responded across, you know, all of our different school districts, and say there's probably going to be studies. I mean, I anticipate in the next year and a half, after we come out of this and we manage the immediate need, we're going to be looking at what worked and what didn't work. Because I'm afraid, you know, we've got teachers, we've got kids, I've got kids in the system. We don't want to have a lost generation of kids. We don't want to have a digital divide where those who were able to have access to internet and sufficient kind of environment to do their work remotely were able to progress and the others weren't. That's not what we're looking for in Kansas. So I think we're going to have a focus on that over the next year and a half of how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? How do we leverage technology in a way that works, that's not eternally frustrating for all the grandparents helping their kids out there, that does work and that makes it effective. And maybe we don't get there for everything, but maybe there are ways that we can do this that'll help us with our education crunch out in western Kansas. I don't know, I'm excited about the possibilities there, and this has opened our eyes to that. What else? I would also say that there's going to be a focus on DCF. You know, I think that we've heard a number of things around the foster care system,
Right.
and you know, nothing hurts the heart more than hearing about kids who are in unfortunate circumstances and who aren't getting the proper treatment. And I'm not a big fan of the privatization experiment that happened, you know, during the Brandenburg era, but we are there where we're at, and so I'm excited that we are introducing more bids. I mean, it's kind of a government thing, but allowing more competitive bids on the DCF providers. I think that we should have more bids on so many more things, including IT contracts and other things, and allow more competition. We don't always need to go with the lowest bid, but the highest quality we get for the right amount of money, so that we're getting the best we can for the state taxpayers. And then they're also doing, I support this, I voted for this Family First program. I'm encouraged by it. It's about preventing kids having to go into the foster care system by addressing the family's needs beforehand. I think there's a lot of things to work out. We don't want to just say, hey, we're going to come and talk to you, and then not provide the services to the kids of the family that's needed. But I think that that's optimistic to help us reduce the load on DCF so we can have better quality in there. From the correction standpoint, we've got so many correction workers here and the
Right.
prisoner families. We've got prisoners coming back this week from Arizona, where we had them as we built the prison and had a capacity issue. We had shipped them out, and they're coming back. We're gonna, you know, I'm encouraged that with all the focus on criminal justice reform, that we're gonna have some real dialogue in the Capitol. I think that could be big-ish. It could cause some emotion, but if we look at nonviolent criminals, veterans, drug addicts, how can we treat those people before or after they've gone in and out of the system, so that we don't have increased recidivism and increased burden and increased impact on taxpayer dollars by having them permanently locked up in our system? And then how do we encourage and support workforce development? Those are going to be big, and I think that we're going to continue. I'm hoping we have an economic bounce back that we're going to have to focus across the state, across different regions. What are our economic proficiencies in the Northeast? What are the things that our aircraft industry needs? We just had an announcement about the supersonic transport loop. That's really exciting that we've made a partnership with the FAA on to deal with Mach 5 aircraft, and there's a big industry out there that we're going to support there. So I think it's, you know, we're going to be about responding, and then economic bounce back, and then looking after our kids here in Kansas. I think those are the big things that I know I'm focused on, and then some smaller bills that we're going to work through.
Okay. All right. I've been speaking with District 5 Senator-elect Jeff Pittman for Movers and Shakers. I'm Ken Miller.
Thanks, Ken. And thanks, everybody, for listening.